All right, so tonight we haven't tied an articulated fly since, it's been probably pre-COVID or very close to it. So I think the last one we tied was Peanut Envy, which is an interesting evolution of this fly we're going to tie tonight. And this is the Circus peanut. And it was invented by a guy named Russ Maddin, who worked for Kelly Gallup when Kelly Gallup had his fly shop in Traverse City, Michigan. And it was extremely effective on trout and smallmouth there and almost everything else. And it was one of the first articulated flies. And Russ Maddin says that he really developed this fly. He wanted something that had a very lively rear action to it. And so he articulated flies have been around for many, many years, but just became popular in the last 20 years or so. So he developed this fly. And then from this fly, Kelly Gallup was so impressed with it that he was basically envious of it and made a few personal improvements, and he called it the Peanut Envy. So if you look at articulated flies, you'll see both of these. But the primary characteristic, of course, if you're not tied any, they have two hooks and they're joined together we're going to use wire made specifically for this purpose. It's called intruder wire. And you can use, this is the Hairlines intruder wire. It's pretty inexpensive, so I think it's worth it to do that, but 20 or 30 pound mono will work as well, monofilament. And if you have a craft store close by, beetle on. If you get a beetle on in this small diameter, the beading wire, it works well also. So just a quick rundown on this fly. It has a tail of marabou that we'll tie. So this back part is basically a woolly bugger with legs. The body is, the flash is Estaz, and we're going to it's regular. This is olive. It is standard size Estaz. We wrap it, palmer it with a saddle hackle. You can also use schlappen if you want a more fuller body. And then we tie in 2 legs on each side in the rear. And then the front is basically the same as the back, except without a tail and with the addition of the lead eyes. So, all right, with that, let's get started. So we'll tie the rear portion of the fly first. So the hooks are the same, so we can put either one of them in the vise. And I'm going to start my thread about an eye length back, because again, if you remember, I like to mark kind of the front of my body with the thread. So I'm going to start about an eye length back. That's where I'm going to stop I want my saddle hackle to stop there. So, and then I'm going to wrap back and just form a thread base back to the bend of the hook, which on this stinger hook is about just in front of where the barb is. So roughly that point. I have a thread base there, and you should have a marabou feather. You only have one because we're only tying one copy of this tonight, since it's basically 2 flies combined into one. So you should have an olive marabou feather. And this is standard strung marabou. We've used the woolly bugger marabou before, but this strung marabou has these longer fibers that give larger flies a nice action in the water. And we want a fairly long tail on this. So I'm going to sweep these fibers with my finger, and we probably want, about a full hook length and a half. So I want to measure from the eye, and I want that to go about 1.5 hook lengths back. So roughly that length. And then where my thumb and forefinger are, I'm going to transfer that spot back to where my thread is, right above the hook point. So I'm taking where my thumb and forefinger are, and I'm moving that right above the hook point. And then I'm bringing my left hand in to grab the marabou. And then I'll take a few wraps, and that spot right behind the hook point. The marabou is going to flip around a little bit. That's fine. And then just wrap forward a few wraps to wrap your marabou and tie it down. Now, to cut off the excess marabou, I like to twist it. That's kind of our little technique for doing that. It cords it up a bit, and then I can trim it off close. And then we wrap it more tightly. Okay. And so my tail is now tied in. Okay. Next material is our saddle hackle. And I like to, depending on how clean you like your fly, Russ Maddin on this fly actually leaves some of these fuzzier marabou type feathers. He leaves a couple of those on it. If you want to do that, you certainly can, but I like to peel mine off and clean that stem up a little bit, because once I tie it in, I'm not trapping all those fibers down. So I'm going to peel those off on my copy. Feel free to leave a ½ inch or a ¼ inch or so. So I'm left with this on mine. This is basically the stem and the saddle hackle. Now, there are a number of ways. If you get on the internet, like any other fly, there's 4 or 5 versions of this out there, and how the feathers are tied in differ on each one. But this is a version from Brian Wise, the guy that does fly fishing in the Ozarks. This is how he ties it, and it looks nice and it's easier to tie. So we're going to tie it in by the tip, and notice the feathers curved. We want that curve to be toward the hook. So, and I'm going to come back about a ½ inch or so from the tip of the feather, and I'm going to tie it in. I don't want it to extend past the hook eye, but I'm going to tie it in right at the rear there. And I'm going to wrap back to the base of my tail. So it's that last thread wrap is right against the base of my tail. And I'm just going to clean that up and then come back and end with my thread hanging about the hook point. How we doing? Good. All right. Estaz is next, and this is, like I say, standard size Estaz, cactus chenille, ice dove chenille, any of those work fine. And to tie in the Estaz, not mandatory, but I like to just take my thumbnail and strip off some of those fibers so I have just the core of it. It just helps a little bit with the tie-in. And I lay that core on top of my hook and take a few wraps and tie it in. So now I have a tail, I have my saddle hackle tied in, and then I have my Estaz tied in. And you notice we're tying things in the Estaz and the saddle hackle in the reverse order in which we'll wrap them. We'll now next wrap the Estaz, and then we'll wrap the saddle hackle. So once you tie the Estaz in, move your thread back to your original front tie-in point. So right about there. That's where I want to tie in my Estaz. And actually, I'm going to come back just a little bit from that point, because I have to tie in my Estaz here, I have to tie in my feather here, and I also have to tie legs in, all in this little space right here. So we don't want to crowd the eye. All right, so go ahead and wrap your estas. You do not need to make touching wraps. You can see mine are just a fraction apart. 3, 4, 5, 6 wraps is what I've done here, which is plenty. And then a couple wraps of thread over it. A couple of more just to cinch it down. Hold the tag end back and a couple more.
Bill,
Yes, sir.
I noticed the hooks you sent me are all the same size.
They
Is
are.
is that meant to be?
It is. Russ Maddin, I watched his original video of when he developed the fly. He said he frequently ties it with 2 hooks the same size. Sometimes he uses a smaller hook in the back, which is kind of more traditional for articulated flies. But he said he generally ties this one with 2 of the same size. So just to make it simple, I just did 2 number 4s.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I didn't mention the hook, but in this particular, you can use really any hook. This is a B10S Gamakatsu size 4, which if you're familiar with like mustad saltwater hooks, this is about the same hook size gap as their number 2. So it's a good size number 4. Thanks for bringing it up, Flip. I was going to mention that and just didn't think of it. I've never seen it with a down eye hook. I've always seen them with straight eye. Is one of yours down eye? Yeah. Right. If you watch Russ Maddin's video, he's very loose about the materials. Any kind of hook, any kind of feather. Now, I want to. These estas fibers almost always go forward, so I want to sweep those back and just give them a little, just to make it a little neater. You don't have to do that. I like to kind of make sure they're not getting over my hook eye if I can. And so there's, all right, now our saddle hackle comes and we just hold it up and we want to sweep these feathers back like this. Just use your finger to gently sweep them out straight or to the rear. If you don't do that, when you wrap it, they'll lay down on top of each other and won't stand out. So we will just start wrapping toward the front, just like we do woolly booger. So I do 1 wrap in the back, and then I start angling my feather toward the front. And just based on the length of your saddle hackle, you'll just have to decide how far apart your wraps need to be. This is a pretty long one, so. And if you get to the front and still have some usable feathers left, go ahead and just wrap them there because we're going to tie them back anyway. I have a good many left, so I'm just going to stack them all up at the front here. And mine flipped around on me forward, but that is okay. I wrapped all the way down to my bare stem. Looks pretty rough right now, but we'll straighten that out. Pick a couple of wraps over that bare stem. Couple more. And on a stem like this, always pull it back and take a few wraps over in front of it to keep it from pulling out. This one's laying back pretty nicely, but if yours is not laying, if your feather fibers are not laying to the rear, sweep it back with your thumb and forefinger and give it a few thread wraps just to hold those down a bit. So again, this is basically a woolly bugger that we've tied so far, except we're going to add legs next. Y'all can probably see better on the TV than I can see with my glasses. It was all those mistakes. Okay. We have everybody tied down with the saddle hackle pretty much, or getting close. Now you should have 4 legs, 4 rubber legs. And pretty much any type of rubber leg will work. These happen to be crazy legs with black golden shiner color. Anything that kind of matches your fly or contrast, whichever you like. Notice that the legs are attached on the end. It's easier if you can leave them attached. And so basically just try to get 2 of the legs and pull them out of that. If they come apart, that's fine, but it's just easier if they stay attached. That way they stay together. So I have two full legs here together. I'm going to move my thread back just a little bit, right about there. I'm about an eye length back. And if you remember, the way I like to tie legs in is I will put them under the hook shank in front of the thread and just bring them up and hold them, hold the tension, and just take a couple, say 3, not super tight wraps. Just probably 3, not loose wraps, but just don't tighten down on it, because we're going to pull the legs down on the side. So to pull the legs down on each side, I'm just going to take them both and pull them straight out to the side like this. And now you notice they are laying on the side of the hook. So I'll hold them back with my fingers and give it a few more thread wraps, build a thread head here, and then whip finish. And at the back of our fly, it's almost done. And that's a little bit bigger head than I would like to have here, but it's better to have too much space behind the eye than too little space behind the eye. Yep, 2 legs tied at the midpoint, and then with a section on each side swept back. So it's just like so. Yeah, go ahead and whip finish and cut the thread. Except for trimming the legs, the length we're finished with the back fly. Now, to trim the legs should be about the same length as your tail. So I just hold both legs back and trim even with the back of my marabou tape. And if we were using head cement here, I would put some head cement on this. I'm not going to do that tonight, but there is the rear part of the fly. So we can put that aside. Now we're getting to the articulation piece here. So once you put your rear section aside, go ahead and get another hook. And let's get it in the vise. And I'm going to start my thread probably about the same as before, about a hook, at least a hook eye back. And I'm going to lay down only about a 1/4 of an inch thread base, and then I'm going to come back to that forward point. Because the first thing we're going to do is tie in our lead eyes here. And these are medium lead eyes. If you were fishing where you needed to get this fly deep or there was a lot of current, you would probably want to use large eyes on it instead of the medium. But in some of our still water, the medium sinks pretty well. Now, once you get your thread base, either if you have a rotary vise, rotate your hook Or if you don't have a rotary vise, just take it out and flip it. Because we're going to tie, for some reason, he doesn't tie this with the eyes on top of the hook, so it will invert. He ties it with the eyes basically below the shaft of the hook. Now you'll see commercial versions of this fly out there that are like this example I tied, where the eyes are on top, like a clouser. But we're going to stick to his version here. And Jim, I noticed in Brian Wise's video, he tied the eyes on top, and when he turned the hook over, he did an edit to his video, and all of a sudden the eyes showed up on the bottom. Well, he probably turned his camera off, rolled them, and then switched his camera back on.
They were getting tied up while they was roll already.
I know. All right, now the way I like to tie an eyes is I hold the eye at an angle. Let's try to get this where you can see it. I hold my thumb down. I hold the eye at an angle, and I want to. You don't crowd the eye with this. You want to get at least an eye length behind the eye, the hook, at least an eye length. And I take a few loose wraps on that diagonal like that. See, it's the eye is at a diagonal. And then I'm going to grab the eye and straighten it out and take a few wraps in the other direction. And then go back and take a few wraps in my original direction. These are all just diagonal wraps. Now I have my hook sideways so you can see the diagonal wraps. So I have probably 8 or 10 diagonal wraps in each direction. And see, I have at least between the front of my barbell eye and the back of the hook eyes, it's probably about an eye width, maybe a little more. And then I like to do something called, I call them stirrup wraps. I don't know what the real name of it is, but it's where I bring the thread under the hook. I come up and over the top of the eye on the same side. Now notice I'm on the same side of the hook. And I go under the hook. I go the opposite side, under the hook, over the top of the eye, under the hook, over the top of the eye, under, over the top of the eye. And so kind of like stirrups on the saddle. And that really stabilizes that eye quite a bit. It's still going to spin on you unless you cement it in there. I think it'll always spin. And then after those stirrup wraps, I take horizontal wraps under the eye, but over the hook. So under the eye, but over the hook, just horizontal tight wraps. That cinches all that down, and they're pretty tight. At that point, I'll flip my hook back over. So once you finish tying in the eye, any way you like to tie your eyes in, that's fine. We'll flip the hook back over. Okay, now time for the articulation part. Doesn't really matter whether you're using this articulation wire or mono. You're going to do this basically the same. I'm going to tie it in like I like to tie these in because I'm paranoid about the articulation wire slipping out. It shouldn't, and I don't think it ever would. But for me, it would slip out on the best fish I've ever caught. So you have about a 2 1/4 inch piece. So I want to, with my thread behind the eye, immediately behind the eye, I want to hold my wire to where it reaches to about the hook eye. And take a few wraps and secure it. Now I'm wrapping behind the hook eye, but see my wire is in front. My wire reaches all the way to the eye of the hook. Now it doesn't matter, but I like to have the wire on the side of the hook. Doesn't matter at all, and then kind of work it to the top, to the near side of the top. So I'm tying it all the way back to about the point of the hook. And the reason I left this little piece at the front is we are eventually going to fold that back and tie it down, double it back. Again, you don't have to do that, but I like to do that. Now our beads, you pretty much have to have a bead. You don't have to have one, but the beads help, one, put some distance between the two hooks, and it helps the hook, the rear hook, not foul on the front hook. And these are 3D beads, so it's a pretty large bead, and olive. So it's a large bead, so I'm only going to use one of these. You can also, if you have a craft store close by, these beads are glass beads, and these are size 14 plus, whatever that is for the bead people. I think I paid 79 cents for 250 of them. If I had this smaller bead, I would use two of them. And I use these glass beads a good bit, and I usually use two of those. But for this larger bead, we're going to use one. And we thread the bead onto the wire. And then we take the rear section of our fly, and there's any number of ways of doing this, but I like to run it through the bottom of the eye out the top, like that. Again, it's not critical, but that's just the way I like to do it.
Can I make a song, Jim?
You can.
Make sure your hook's down.
Yeah.
I tie these things and then articulated wise I look, I've got it upside down. So I got
One way and one the other. That's something like I would do, Jim.
That's still called fish.
Oh, yeah. And then we take that tag end of that wire and we feed it back through our bead. Back through the bead, yes. So now I have something like that. Hmm?
My superpower, getting hooked on my own.
No. Now, it's somewhat important at this point, before we start tying this down. Some flies, you pull the bead tight against the hook. This fly, it should just be touching the hook. And at this point, I have too large of a loop here. I want this loop to be not much wider than the width of my hook eye. So I'm going to pull that in to, about like that, I guess. So it's a fairly small loop. And then I want to make sure that my bead is just touching but not tight against it. Now, ideally, this loop of wire is on the same plane as your hook. In other words, the wire is not laying flat, it's not angled, because if it's straight up and down, the two hooks will ride parallel with each other, will ride on the same plane. But if it's sideways, your rear hook could ride 90 degrees. So just try to twist it around to where they're close to being the same, and then start wrapping forward. And I like to get it on top of the hook shank. And if I judged your length right, you should have about the same length of wire pointing forward. So I'm left with something like this. I'm going to shove that bead back just a little bit. And I'm going to wrap to just a little bit behind the eye. Now, if you have wire cutters, you could cut this off. But like I say, I like to tie these back. So I'm going to take a bodkin and just hold these two up with a bodkin and roll them back with my fingers.
You have to put another layer of red on.
I don't know that. I get, yeah, it could. So it.
On that articulated part,
Uh-huh.
if you make that loop too big, that hook foul. You know, your brain, you think the looser it is, it's gonna wiggle more. It doesn't. most time that back part is pushing that front when you pull it. And if you don't, it will foul, it'll come around,
Hook underneath that. And you could actually pull it up closer than this, so it's kind of like, as long as it moves freely,
Yeah.
you really can't have it too small. Good point, Jim. Now, again, this fold back the wire piece, you don't have to do that. You can just put some super glue on it and move forward, trim it with wire cutters. Little wire cutters like this are handy to have for that, or a pair of old scissors. All right, so once all that articulation piece is done, move your thread back to your rear tie-in point where you started, where you stopped tying in the wire, right there. And at this point, we're essentially going to repeat what we did in the rear without the tail. We're not going to tie a tail in. Now, Jim, use mono for your articulation. Do you fold it back and tie it, or just go? Yeah.
I know it's super glue, because but on top of it, I say I tie when I do the back part of my glue, I go off and do some like make sure glue set up, but I fold it back and then I glue it on top of it.
Yeah. So it's
belt and suspenders.
Yeah, it will not come off. Yeah. Okay, so just like the rear, we're going to tie saddle hackle in next. So grab one of your saddle hackles, and again, I'm going to pull on mine these fuzzies out. So left with something like that. And we're going to tie, just like before, we're going to tie it in by the tip. So I'm just going to hold 1/2 inch or so of the tip. I don't want to tie it right at the tip or it might break off. So just 1/2 inch or so, and you can either wrap your thread over the remaining part or trim it off with your scissors. So I have saddle hackle. And this is where like a little hook like this comes in handy, that I can hook the rear part of my fly into. And a little hair clip to clip all that stuff out of the way. All right, we should have enough, hopefully we'll have enough estas left. Make sure you have about at least 2.5 inches of estas. If you don't, let me give you some more. And just like I did before, I'll strip off a little bit of that outer fiber and tie in just that core. Once I tie the estas in, I'll move my thread forward to behind the eye. I want to leave a little gap behind the eye because, again, I have to tie my saddle hackle off there, and I'm going to tie legs in there. Okay, let's wrap our estas forward to our thread, and just like before, we do not have to make touching wraps. You can separate the wraps just a bit. And do not, if you're ahead of me, do not trim off your excess estas. So make a couple wraps over.
Like such a good idea.
Tie it down, yes, but do not trim it off. Because if you do, you'll just have to tie it right back in again.
Want that tied up where it's on.
I want a little, yeah, I want a little,
With the bead there.
I want it to, yeah, just right where you started your thread on the wire in front of the bead, right there. And just tie it off maybe 1/8 of an inch behind or the just a little gap behind the eyes, just enough room to tie in our feathers and our legs. Articulated flies are a lot of fun to tie, but they're not as much fun to lose because they take a while to tie. And I've been losing a lot of streamers recently, underwater stuff. Okay, so let's wrap our saddle hackle. Again, did you cut yours off?
Yeah.
That's okay, you both tie.
I would.
Let me tie it back in. Make sure you bring all your feathers back or whatever the real word for that is and start palmering forward. Get over there better. And again, if I have a lot of feather left as I get to my thread, I'm just going to stack those wraps up right in the front. You almost can't have too many feather fibers there. All right, and I'll tie off at that stem. And again, when I tie in a feather shaft like that, be sure to fold it back and take a few wraps in front of it. Your thread's going to move forward towards your eye, but that's fine because we're going to move it back here in just a second. Right, now, I want to sweep these feather fibers back a bit with my fingers. And just like I did in the rear, I want to make a few wraps to kind of hold them toward the back. And yes, Estaz is in the way. And so when we wrap down over the front, now these feathers can kind of come back if they're longer and basically cover that hook gap in the water, the gap between the hooks. And I do have written instructions on this that I'll email out once I get the YouTube link tomorrow. I'll email those out. Is that how much they are? $9.95? All right, so legs are next. So you probably have 2 legs left. So let's take those 2 legs. And again, I like to hold under the hook shank and just grab them with my fingers like this. I take a few, 2 or 3 loose wraps and then make sure I hold them down along each side and then tie them down. If your feather fibers get in the way, just sweep them back a little bit. And don't trim your legs yet. That'll be the last thing we'll do. Cliff, Peter, good? Good, okay. Now, once your legs are tied in, hold your Estaz up and back. And move your thread to in front of the eyes. So just wrap your thread to the front of the eyes. And I'm going to stop here because I want you to watch what I'm doing before you do it. It's kind of hard to follow along. Now you see why we left the Estaz, or you may see how we left it, why we left the Estaz, because what we'll do now is we will take a full wrap of the Estes behind the eyes over this leg tie-in point to neaten that up. And then we'll figure eight it over the eyes and finish with the Estes in front. So I'll take one complete wrap over. And then you don't have to do it this way, but I will go down and under the far side, back up. I went behind and under the far side, then behind the near side and under, and then back to the front. You can do it any way you'd like to figure eight and cover it. And then go ahead and take a few thread wraps. I'm reaching around the camera here, so sorry for the flopping thread. Take a few thread wraps over the Estes, pull the Estes back, and take a few thread wraps in front. And then now trim off your Estes. I think what was his name? Bruce Sublett tied the goober bug that a lot of us fish a lot with. It's tied with Estes. He says it's impossible to keep it all out of the eye of the hook. So, and he's right. I'm hardly ever successful with that. But Rich Hudson will enjoy that to help keep the Estes from binding down around the hook. If I were to whip finish right now, that Estes, it's impossible to hold those short fibers back. So what I like to do first, Rich, is take a few half hitches. And I'm taking 4 of them. And those half hitches kind of hold that Estes back. And you can just complete with half hitches, or I'm going to give it, once that Estes is back a bit like it is, I'm going to give it a whip finish on top of the half hitches. And you'll still trap a few of those, but not as many that way. But certainly just a number of half, and then trim your thread. And hey, I didn't get any in the eye. That's amazing. And now we're almost finished. So let's, I'll wait for everyone to get their Estes and whip finishing or half hitching done. And then, yep, once you whip finish, go ahead and trim your thread or half hitch, whichever you're doing. Make sure everyone's finished here before we move on. And when we trim our legs, I don't want the front legs to be too long. So I don't want them to foul on the rear hooks. I'm going to take my fly out of the vise and hold it up upright. And I want to trim the legs either even with the bend of the rear hook, but not past the bend of the rear hook, because I don't want these legs fouling in that rear hook. So I'm going to trim these about even with the back of the bend of the rear hook, maybe just a little bit in front of that. And try not to trim your other set of legs with it. Ask me how I know. And so those now are just a hair too short to foul. And that is it. That is the Circus peanut. Except for the articulation piece, it's basically 2 woolly boogers plus some lead eyes. So I have fished the peanut Emily version of that and caught fish on it, but I have not yet fished this one. But by all accounts, it is extremely effective. Now, for the quote, Pete Cooper, what's his white and chartreuse quote, Jim?
And 2 colors.
White, chartreuse and white. I have one in chartreuse and white
Yeah.
with white eyes. So that really blows out on the camera, but
Wow, nice.
yeah.
Oh, do the shot.
Yeah, that white is hard to see.
Yeah.
But the olive's a great color too. So it, the flip, Peter, I think I sent you, you may have enough material to tie two. I know I sent you 2 eyes and 2 hooks, but
Yeah.
okay, good. Because I have some material here for everyone if they want to tie a second one. But since it's really 2 flies in one, we're only going to tie 1 copy tonight. So any
Yeah,
questions? Any questions or thoughts or?
Yeah, why wouldn't you just thought, I mean, that's how I was talking to Mike the other night, and everything down here where we fish is always so dirty and a lot of crap in the water.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we just automatically tie these where the hooks go right up?
Yeah, Jim asked, we talked about that same question. The first 2 I tied flip, I did tie that way. You may not can tell on the camera, but this one is tied with the eyes on top, like a clouser. This is just the way that Russ Maddin and Kelly Gallup timed. So it's kind of just true to the original pattern more than anything else.
Clean water fishing.
Yeah, clean water fishing, but yeah. I tie mine with the eyes on top probably. So I don't know if it would invert because there's a lot of, there's a lot more resistance to this fly in the water than with a clouser or something like that with the marabou. So I don't know if even a large eye would invert it. I'd have to try it and see. I haven't tried it yet. This is a medium eye, so like in our still waters here, where sometimes we like for that slower sinking rate, this would be appropriate. But yeah, if you want to invert it, probably a large eye would be better. I would think this would be a fairly buoyant fly, so.
Yeah.
I know, what is his name in Baton Rouge that does all the gar, Ken Hall does all the gar fishing?
Yeah.
Yeah, he uses, I'd be interested to ask him that question. He uses a lot of articulated flies fishing for gar in Baton Rouge and,
Brian, this, I think, on the site.
oh, does
I think he.
Brian has? Yeah. I might ask Brian Roberts how he ties it because he fishes in those waters around there. And I'm sure that, there's a lot of trash in some of that water as well. Like we have Little River and it's full of refrigerators and tires and car parts and everything else. So, nice, clean water. All right, folks. So that is it. That 1 copy. I know we usually tie 2, but that is basically 2. I'm ready to go out and fish it some. I haven't fished much recently. So Peter, we'll look forward to your post on what you catch with this, since you seem to fish more than a lot of us. So you're enjoying retirement. So
I enjoy testing the flies out, and they always produce.
good deal.
Thank you, Bill.
All right. Enjoy it,
Thank
y'all.
you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. It's a great fly.
Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
Here, y'all. All right. Good night.
So Bill,
Thank you.